bum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-da-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum.
Welcome to Everyday Musicality, the podcast in which we discuss all things related to Gordon's music learning theory and how it can help unlock the inner musician that lives inside of all of us. I'm your host, Heather Shouldice, music educator and faculty member for the Gordon Institute for Music Learning. In this episode, I talk about music aptitude tests and how they are useful in providing differentiated instruction in music. Hello and welcome to the Everyday Musicality podcast. Before we get rolling, I want to start by giving a shout out to new patrons of the podcast, Matt Novachis and Teresa McKnight. Thank you so much for your support. If, like Matt and Teresa, this podcast has helped you and you want to show your support for the show, you can become a patron on Patreon and make a one-time or recurring donation at patreon.com/everydaymusicality. Just a side note, if you would like to make a one-time donation, Patreon currently only supports recurring donations, but they state on their website that you can make a donation, and then once that clears, you can cancel the monthly reoccurrences. So today, we're continuing our mini-series of episodes about music aptitude. Way back in episode 2, I introduced the concept of music aptitude as the potential to learn music and develop musical skills that is present in everyone. And I talked about how our aptitude is different from our music achievement, which is our current musical knowledge and skills that we have developed and can demonstrate. Then, in the previous episode, number 24, I talked about the phases of music aptitude, how when we're born, our aptitude is developmental, meaning it can fluctuate depending on our environment, and then our aptitude stabilizes later in life, somewhere around the age of 9 is what Dr. Gordon theorized. This is especially important for teachers and parents of young children to be aware of because they have the most influence in keeping children's developmental aptitude as high as possible by providing a nurturing musical environment rich in a variety of tonalities, meters, and styles. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about available music aptitude tests published by Dr. Gordon that music teachers can use to measure their students' music aptitude. Before I do that, though, I think it's important to talk about why we might want to measure our students' music aptitude. First of all, we don't aptitude test for the purpose of deciding who should or shouldn't have access to music education. It's not to place students in ensembles or on particular instruments. The idea of music aptitude as potential that is present in everyone means that everyone should have access to music education and opportunities to engage with music in the way in which they are most motivated. The main purpose of measuring students' music aptitude is to inform our teaching practice so that we can individualize instruction in order for each student to feel successful. So often, we tend to teach to the middle in music education. But when we do this, some students will be frustrated and other students will be bored. In order to keep each student appropriately challenged and growing musically, we can differentiate our instruction based on each student's music aptitude. In doing this, we can teach all students the same general musical skills and the same general musical content, but we can tweak the difficulty level of the specific content with which each student interacts. For example, if we're teaching tonal patterns or rhythm patterns, we can be teaching all students patterns in the same context and function, but we can tweak the difficulty level of the specific pattern to which each student is responding. And we can do this based on the measurements gained through administering a valid and reliable music aptitude test. We may have students who are currently achieving far below their potential, and by administering a music aptitude test, we can identify those students in whom their high aptitude is present but latent, meaning it hasn't manifested yet. In addition, if test results show a student to have high aptitude in a particular musical dimension, we can provide them with a more challenging opportunity to engage with the context and content. Similarly, if a student has low aptitude in a particular dimension, we can provide them with opportunities to engage with the context and content that are within their reach. By differentiating instruction in this way, we can prevent our high aptitude students from becoming bored and our low aptitude students from becoming frustrated, so that all students are appropriately engaged and growing musically. I'll be talking more about using aptitude test results to differentiate instruction in the next episode. For today, let's focus on the tests we can use to validly and reliably measure our students' music aptitudes. Dr. Gordon spent a lot of his life's work developing and validating these tests, doing extensive research on every little detail to be sure the tests would be valid and reliable. Today, we're going to talk about 4 of those tests: 2 for developmental music aptitude and 2 for stabilized music aptitude. First is the primary measures of music audiation, or PMMA for short. Gordon developed the PMMA as a test of developmental music aptitude for children in kindergarten through 3rd grade. Because students mark their own answers on an answers sheet, the PMMA can be given in a group setting or individually. It uses scripted directions and recorded test examples, so the PMMA test kit comes with a manual containing all the instructions, a CD with all the recorded test items, test sheets, and scoring masks. The PMMA consists of 2 subtests, a tonal subtest and a rhythm subtest. Each of these 2 subtests consists of 40 items and takes about 20 to 25 minutes to administer. So altogether, the PMMA takes 40 to 50 minutes, but with little ones, I highly recommend not giving both subtests on a single day. When I was teaching kids, I would give the tonal subtest one day and the rhythm subtest on another day. I believe the only requirement is that these happen within 1 week of one another. Both the tonal subtest and the rhythm subtest of the PMMA consist of recorded pairs of patterns, and the students simply listen to each pair and tell whether they are same or different. The idea here is that being able to hold the pairs of patterns in their audiation long enough to make comparisons with finer and finer distinctions is indicative of their level of music aptitude. Here's an example of what a tonal item sounds like.
First, second.
So clearly, in that case, the patterns were different. Now, some of these patterns are very obviously different, like that one, but in some pairs of patterns, the differences are very subtle. For example, first, bum, bum, bum. Second, bum, bum, bum. In this case, because it was only the middle pitch that was different and only very slightly different, a lot of kids would think that those 2 patterns were the same. But your higher aptitude kids tonally would be able to discern that the middle pitches were slightly different. Here's an example of what a rhythm item sounds like.
First, second.
Now, you probably noticed that there were 2 kinds of sounds in those patterns. There was the beeping of the rhythm pattern itself, and then in the background there were little clicks indicating the beat. In some patterns, it's actually the beat rather than the rhythm that makes the patterns different. For example, if we had the 2 patterns, bum, 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 bum. Second, bum, 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 bum. In that case, the clicks would imply a different metric context. So on the PMMA in each subtest, there are practice items that you do together with the students, and then there are 40 actual test items. Once you click play on the actual 40 test items, each subtest only takes about 10 minutes. It's just the passing out of materials and reading of the instructions that takes a bit more time, especially with little ones. One thing that you'll notice if you look at the test sheet is that there are no words written on them, and the items are not numbered. This is because Gordon didn't want a student's reading ability or familiarity with numbers to hinder their ability to complete the test. So the test paper is comprised of only pictures. For each pair of patterns, students mark their answer, same or different, by circling a pair of faces that look same or different. So each pair of patterns has a set of 2 boxes with 2 same faces in the top box and 2 different faces in the bottom box. The 2 same faces on top are both smiling and have curly hair, and then on the bottom there's 1 smiling face with curly hair and 1 frowning face with spiky hair. After listening to the 2 patterns, the students circle the box with the 2 faces that fits their answer, same or different. Then, to designate each test item, there's another picture above each set of boxes. So instead of saying number 3, the recording might say car. So the student knows they should circle under the car for those 2 patterns. In fact, I've had students who know very little English who are able to successfully take this test. Even though they might not have been able to understand the word for each picture, they could figure out same and different from the faces and circle their answer. I might just help them a little with staying on the correct item. Once your students have completed the subtests, you score them to come up with a raw score of items correct out of the total 40. And then, in the manual, there's a chart that helps you convert each raw score into a percentile ranking depending on the student's grade level. So, for example, a raw score of 35 on the PMMA tonal subtest for a student in 1st grade would translate to the 88th percentile. This essentially means that if they were in a room with 99 other 1st graders, they would likely score better than 88 or more of them. That's what we mean when we say the 88th percentile. Now, if a student in 3rd grade scores a 35 on the tonal subtest, that would translate to the 56th percentile, so right in the middle for 3rd grade. Once you have your raw scores and convert them to the percentile rank norms, you can then use those to gauge whether each student has high, average, or low aptitude in either the tonal or rhythm dimension. Anything at the 80th percentile and above is considered high aptitude, and anything at the 20th percentile and below is considered low aptitude. Everything else in between the 20th and the 80th percentiles is considered average. So you get a percentile ranking for the tonal subtest and for the rhythm subtest, and from these, you know whether the student is stronger tonally or rhythmically, and where they rank in relation to other children their age. In the example I shared earlier, the 1st grade student who got a raw score of 35 on the tonal subtest, which equates to the 88th percentile, that student would be considered to have high tonal aptitude for a 1st grade student. For the 3rd grade student who scored a 35 on the tonal subtest, their percentile ranking of the 56th percentile means they would be considered to have average tonal aptitude for a 3rd grader. Knowing whether each student falls into the high, average, or low categories tonally and rhythmically can help you differentiate instruction tonally and rhythmically. Now, I want to make sure I acknowledge that a student can get a low score by chance. Maybe they really do have low aptitude, or maybe they had a bad day, or they were distracted because their stomach was growling because they didn't eat breakfast, or their parents had been fighting, or they're just not good at taking tests. It's very possible to get a low score by chance, but it's rare to get a high score by chance. So if a student scores high, you can trust that this is a reliable indication that they have higher than average aptitude in that dimension. Like I said, we'll be talking about how to use aptitude test results in an upcoming episode. Next, let's move on to the IMMA, which stands for Intermediate Measures of Music Audiation. Gordon developed the IMMA several years after the PMMA because he was hearing from teachers who were using MLT-based instruction that supported students' audiation development, and they were saying that the test was too easy, that too many of their students were scoring high on the PMMA. Now, this makes sense because remember, the PMMA is a test of developmental music aptitude. If students are exposed to a rich musical environment, this will be nurturing their developmental music aptitudes and helping to raise them back up toward where they were when the students were born. So if students' developmental aptitudes are being nurtured by all the tonalities and meters and the focus on audiation development in an MLT-based classroom, it makes sense that they might be scoring higher than students who aren't exposed to that kind of musical environment and aren't having their developmental musical aptitudes nurtured in that way. So It makes sense that teachers were saying their students were all scoring too high. But that's a problem because, as I discussed in a previous episode, Gordon theorized that music aptitude is normally distributed among the population, that in any given group of people, you should see a bell-shaped curve in their aptitudes. And that's what you actually want as a teacher. When you look at the aptitude test scores, you want to see that bell-shaped curve so you know who your higher aptitude students are and who your lower aptitude students are, so that you can keep everyone appropriately challenged. If they're almost all scoring at the 80th percentile and above, you don't really know who falls at the high end and who falls at the low end of that bell curve. So it won't help you differentiate instruction as much. So Gordon used his pattern research to develop the IMMA. The IMMA is essentially the same test as the PMMA, just with more difficult patterns. By using more difficult patterns, you'll be able to differentiate between the students who can hear those finer and finer differences in the pairs of patterns and those who can't, so you can get that bell-shaped curve in the scores. As I mentioned earlier, the PMMA has norms for kindergarten through 3rd grade. The IMMA has norms for students in 1st through 4th grades and also includes norms for students in 5th and 6th grades. However, the IMMA should be used with caution for students in 5th and 6th grade because, again, it's a test of developmental music aptitude. Students in 5th and 6th grade typically are past the age of 9 years, which is when Gordon theorized that our aptitude stabilizes. So it's more appropriate to administer a test of stabilized aptitude to students past 4th grade. More on stabilized aptitude tests in a minute. First, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that the PMMA and the IMMA are meant to be administered biannually or at least annually so that you can monitor the fluctuation in students' developmental aptitudes. I used to give the test to my elementary students every fall and then near the end of the school year. Again, this helps you monitor fluctuations in individual students, and it can give you feedback on your teaching. If you find that students' developmental aptitudes in a dimension are staying the same or going up, that tells you that you're probably doing a decent job of providing a rich musical environment. It can also tell you when you're not doing the best job at that if you see the scores going down. I don't know if you've noticed yet in this podcast, but I am all about tonalities and harmonies and chord progressions. So sometimes I would look at my students' end of the year aptitude scores and notice they had gone up tremendously tonally, but maybe they had dropped rhythmically. And if I was being honest with myself, I think it's because I was tending to focus a lot on the tonal dimension in my teaching and neglecting the rhythm dimension. So that was always a good wake-up call for me to remind myself that I needed to pay more attention to rhythm in my teaching. One more quick word about the PMMA and IMMA before we move on to the tests of stabilized aptitude. Someone has developed computerized versions of these tests that you can purchase on CD-ROM or that you can have students take through the GIA website. But I have to warn you, I have not had good experience with the computerized versions of the tests. I tried it one school year, and some of my students who had consistently scored at the 80th percentile and above for years were scoring below the 50th percentile. And I think that was for 2 reasons. The first is that the computerized version allows an unlimited amount of time for students to choose their answer before moving on to the next item, but you can't replay it. When Gordon researched and standardized the paper versions of the PMMA and IMMA, he studied every tiny detail, right down to the exact amount of seconds in between each set of patterns. This was to get the students to make a gut decision and move on to the next one. On the computer version, having unlimited time makes it really easy for a student to just space out and forget the 2 patterns and then just guess. The second reason I think the computerized versions of the PMMA and IMMA are not valid and reliable is because they use a gimmick of a cute cartoon dog for motivation. After every certain number of test items that the students complete, the dog does something. It might dig a hole or bury a bone. And I think there are some kids who just want to see what that cute dog is going to do, so they don't even listen to the patterns. They just click randomly so they can get to the next thing that the dog's going to do. So personally, I do not recommend the computerized versions of the PMMA or IMMA. I just don't think they are valid and reliable. That's just my 2 cents. As far as I'm aware, Gordon didn't actually have anything to do with the creation of the computerized versions. Someone else simply took the test items and transferred them to computer format. But as far as I know, the computerized versions weren't rigorously researched to ensure validity and reliability like the paper versions. So I would strongly suggest going with the paper versions. Again, that's just my 2 cents. Okay, moving on to tests of stabilized aptitude. As I mentioned earlier, although the IMMA manual provides percentile rank norms for students in grades 5 and 6, the legitimacy of those norms is questionable, as all of the reliability and validity statistics for the test were done only with the scores of K through 4 students. So IMMA has limited use as a test of stabilized aptitude. It's also difficult for older students to score above the 80th percentile on the IMMA. For example, in order for a 4th grade student to score at the 80th percentile or above on the tonal test, they can't get more than 2 items wrong. I have some students that very easily will just space out for an item or 2, and right there, that may be knocking them out of the high aptitude grouping. So for this reason, using IMMA with older students may result in a skewed distribution that will not reflect accurately where each student falls on the normal curve. When I discussed this issue with Dr. Gordon when he was still alive, he suggested that one tonal subtest and one rhythm subtest of the musical aptitude profile could be used with upper elementary students in place of the IMMA. The Musical Aptitude Profile, or MAP for short, is the most thorough test of stabilized music aptitude, and it's actually the first aptitude test that Dr. Gordon developed. The MAP is designed for children in grades 4 through 12, and it consists of 3 tests: a tonal test, a rhythm test, and a sensitivity test. Each of these 3 tests are divided into subtests. The tonal test has melody and harmony, the rhythm test has tempo and meter, and the sensitivity test has phrasing, balance, and style subtests. So that's a total of 7 subtests. Each tonal and rhythm subtest has 40 items, and each sensitivity subtest has 30 items. So each of those 3 tests, tonal, rhythm, and sensitivity, takes about 50 minutes to administer. So that would add up to about 150 minutes or 2.5 hours if you choose to administer the entire test. However, as I mentioned a minute ago, you can choose to administer only the melody and tempo subtests as reflections of tonal and rhythm aptitude if there's not enough time to administer the whole test. The instructions and test items for the MAP are recorded and are available on CD with the complete test kit, which sells for $140 from GIA Publications. Unlike the PMMA and IMMA, the MAP has a traditional bubble form on which students indicate their answer by filling in a bubble for each numbered test item. For each item on the tonal and rhythm subtests, students hear a short song followed by a musical answer and must determine if the 2 were like or different. Their answer sheet also has an in-doubt response option to help prevent students from getting artificially high scores by guessing. Here's an example of a recorded prompt from the melody subtest. And here is an example of a recorded prompt from the meter subtest. Once students complete the subtest, you calculate the raw score. Then you take the raw score for each subtest and use a chart in the manual to convert it to a standard score, which can then be converted to a grade level percentile rank norm. This can be calculated for each subtest of the 3 tests, tonal, rhythm, and sensitivity, and for the composite score of all the tests combined. Norms are also provided for musically select students in grades 4 through 6, 7 through 9, and 10 through 12. Now, the MAP is extremely long, which is a good thing in that this strengthens the reliability of the test, but it may not be practical to give the entire test in all settings. However, because it's a test of stabilized aptitude, MAP theoretically only needs to be administered once. Because our stabilized aptitude is assumed to stay fairly consistent over time, you don't need to re-administer the MAP every year. Also, each of the tests or subtests can be administered at different times, or a teacher could also choose to only administer certain tests or subtests, as I said before. After the MAP, Gordon was asked to develop a shorter stabilized aptitude test, so he developed the Advanced Measures of Music Audiation, or AMMA. The AMMA is designed as a stabilized aptitude test for grades 7 and older. A nice thing about the AMMA is that it includes only one test that yields both a tonal score and a rhythm score, and it only takes about 15 minutes to administer. The AMMA uses recorded instructions and test examples, which come on CD with the complete test kit from GIA for $70. For each test item, the students hear 2 short melodies and determine if they are same or different, and if they're different, whether a difference is a tonal difference or a rhythm difference. Here's an example of one of the test items.
First. Second.
The responses are used to obtain a composite score and adjusted tonal and rhythm scores, which are then converted to percentile rank norms. This can be done for music majors, non-music majors, or high school students so that you get that normal distribution of scores in order to know who has high, average, and low aptitude within that particular setting. So let's recap the 4 tests we talked about in this episode. If you're interested in aptitude testing your elementary school students, you could choose either the PMMA or the IMMA, which are tests of developmental music aptitude. If you're interested in testing your older students or yourself, there's the MAP for upper elementary through high school and the AMMA for high school and older. Now that we've talked about why we might want to aptitude test our students and the published tests that are available, in the next episode I'll be discussing how we can use the results of a music aptitude test to help us differentiate instruction in order to meet each student's individual needs and challenge them appropriately so that every student can experience musical growth and success. Before I wrap up this episode, I wanted to remind you of our current giveaway from sponsor GIA Publications, and it's a good one. It's a complete IMMA test kit containing the test item CD, the manual, the answer sheets, the scoring mask, the whole shebang. The kit is valued at $100, so this is a fantastic opportunity if you've never aptitude tested your students before. To enter, all you need to do is share this podcast, either your favorite episode or just the show in general. You can do this in a few ways. You can share it on social media and tag the Everyday Musicality Podcast Facebook page so that I get a notification of the tag. I don't have a podcast account on Twitter or Instagram, but if you want to share it there, just email me a screen cap of your post at everydaymusicality@gmail.com. Finally, if you're not interested in sharing on social media, you could email a friend or colleague to tell them about the show and either CC or BCC me or forward me a copy of your email after you've sent it. And remember, I'm sweetening the deal by giving you one entry for every way that you share the podcast. If you want to post on multiple social media platforms or email multiple friends, I'm willing to give you an entry for every single one of those shares. So if you really want to win that IMMA test kit, go ahead and start sharing away. You have until April 27th to enter, and I'll be announcing the winner in the episode that will go live on May 4th. Also, I wanted to mention that our other podcast sponsor, the Gordon Institute for Music Learning, has announced the dates for their summer 2-week professional development levels courses, as well as 1-week online Introduction to MLT courses. You can find more information about these, including dates and instructors, on the GIML website at www.giml.org. I'll also link to those pages in the show notes. In the meantime, if you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please get in touch. You can email me or send me a voice memo at everydaymusicality@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and let's keep musicking every day.